Bonsoir tous et mes nouveaux amis. Hit me once, hit me twice, hit me 3 times. Merci. And those of you who just joined us, we are not crazy. We did some movement today. It was a fantastic session. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'm not going to talk much tonight about the League of Intrapreneurs, my organization. It's not mine, actually. It's a global network that consists of many people. But I'm here after over drinks if you want to talk to me about the League. What I would say, though, is you are part of a growing movement. You are part of a growing tribe of intrapreneurs with an I. So it's not misspelled. You know, there are entrepreneurs working hard on the outside to deliver social impact. You've chosen a different path for the moment. You've chosen to work on the inside, and we need you. It's important. And I was so moved to be here today, to listen to all of your stories, to hear the different stages of the journeys that you're on, but to see a commitment to impact from within. And I guess I just wanted to share from the League's perspective. We're in 10 countries and growing now. So you have tribes in South Korea. You have tribes in Brazil. You have tribes in Mexico and Peru and Canada, in the UK and Germany. These are your colleagues doing the difficult work of change from within. So the League is here really to connect and support you all. So I look forward to many more conversations. So we'll see if this works. I might need help. Alina, could you do my next slide for me? Sorry, this isn't. I have too many gadgets here. Technology is going to fail. Bear with us. Right. So this happened. I'm not sure if you know these gentlemen in the picture. Trump is quite recognizable. And then Boris Johnson, who is the new Foreign Secretary of the UK. On the right, these are some young millennial colleagues of mine, painted this mural in Bristol. It was meant to be a joke, right? But this happened, and we can think about who from Friends might join in the mural, right? You know, these are very interesting times, and I'm not here to talk about politics. It's not about what side you're on here. But this is a symptom that our political and economic system is broken. It's not working for many, many people, right? And the question here today is, what is business's role in this? What are we going to do as intrapreneurs to address the issues that we're facing? So I'm going to talk tonight about, sorry, Alina, you might have to do next slide for me. Thank you. I'm going to talk tonight about 3 disruptors that I see really giving rise to this movement of intrapreneurship. And I should have said at the beginning, please, if I'm speaking too quickly, I'm American, I tend to if I'm speaking too quickly, please just do this, and I will slow down. But I'm going to speak tonight about 3 disruptors that I see as really giving rise to this intrapreneurship movement. And then share a few stories of intrapreneurs and the work they're doing. And then talk a bit about what you can do in your organization. So it was interesting today, we have both intrapreneurs working on projects. We had an incredible number of people that are trying to create the supportive conditions for intrapreneurs. We call them the facilitators, which is an incredibly important role. So I'm going to talk a bit about, you know, how you can create those enabling conditions for intrapreneurs. So the 3 disruptors, if you will, I'll go into these in more detail in a minute, but the first are systemic threats. The second is what I would call the race for talent. And the third is market disruption. And you know, these 3 disruptors are really creating, if you have the term perfect storm in French, but you know, this opportunity for either disruption. So is your company going to be disrupted by this, or is this an opportunity for innovation? And of course, intrapreneurs see the glass half full. We see the opportunity for innovation. So the first disruptor, this idea of systemic threats. Sorry, next slide, and you can go one more even. Thank you. So society is facing a number of threats on an unprecedented scale. You know, we have from coral reefs to climate change, violent conflict to inequality. These are systems failures, and they're going to require system solutions. So we need to mobilize people on a scale that we haven't seen before. You know, we need the dreamers, we need the doers, we need the disruptors. We need Steve Jobs called them misfits. I heard today this wonderful term, mouton avec 5 pattes. So we need our mouton, right? We need the intrapreneurs really taking on these systemic challenges. So the next slide is an example of how intrapreneurs are shifting systems, you know, really working at this systems level. And I think what is very special about intrapreneurs, and also why they're coming to the fore today, is because they think in systems and see these systems connection and the role that business can play. So this is Miriam Turner. She works for a company called Interface, which is a global carpet manufacturer. So maybe not the most sexy industry, but she really saw an opportunity to shift the system from linear manufacturing, right? So where there's inputs, where we extract from the earth and then waste at the end. She saw an opportunity to create a circular model. And her particular opportunity came about when she learned that 640,000 tons of fishing nets are discarded in our seas each year. Right, so this is 10% of the marine debris annually is made up of fishing nets, which is an astonishing statistic. Now her company uses plastic to create, or the polymers in those fishing nets can be used to create the yarn for the carpet. So somebody said to her, they knew she was a bit of an intrapreneur, they said, hey Miriam, here's an opportunity, you know, what can you do with this? So she's been working for the past several years to develop what they would call a closed loop or a circular model, where they are working with the fishing communities to take the nets out of the oceans and turn those into new carpets. But that wasn't everything. We also noticed that the communities they were working with, these fishing communities in places like the Philippines, are experiencing extreme poverty. And as these nets remain in the ocean, they continue to catch fish, which further degrades the fishing stock, which further pushes these communities into poverty. And she said, what if we could include these fishing communities in the supply chain? Have them help us take the nets out of the sea, provide them with income, and support them with the community savings and loans programs. So in effect, creating a regenerative model where these fishing communities are benefiting, the environment is being cleaned up, and they're having a wonderful story to tell to their customers about this new model. So it's an example, but there are many, many more, and I'm sure some of you here in this room today are working on these system shifts. So, you know, other circular economy projects and the like. And I just, excuse me, the next slide is a wonderful statistic. This was a report released at Davos a few weeks back by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, and it looks at the fact that sustainable business models can open up economic opportunities worth up to $12 trillion US and create up to 380 million jobs. So this is the opportunity space, right? This isn't just about disruption. This is fundamentally about innovating to solve systemic challenges, but doing it from a business perspective. So the second disruptor is this, what I would call this race for talent. So what percent of employees do you think are engaged at work? 20% are engaged. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Higher, lower? Higher, lower? Lower, 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 lower. Yeah. It's a shocking 13%. Right? So very close. So the next slide. So that means 87% of us are going to work each day. Like, why? Right? Our head in our hands. We're disengaged from work. This is just shocking, right? But what's really interesting is couple this with the fact that the next generation, so what we call the millennials, Generation Z, they're very clear about what they want from work. They want purpose. They want meaning, sens. They want creativity. They want autonomy. So if you are working for a corporation, if you're in human resources and talent management, you're competing for this talent, and they're not going to come work for a big fuddy-duddy corporation where this is what's happening, right? They're going to go work for the sexy startup, or they might start up something themselves. So this is something that's also giving rise to intrapreneurship, is this desire for people at work to have meaning, to bring their full selves, my whole self to work, that I don't have to leave my values at the door. And so what we see with intrapreneurs is that they're really pioneering this model. They're pioneering this idea of bringing my whole self to work. So the example I would share with you here is one of the first intrapreneurs that I ever met. His name is Sam McCracken. And Sam is a Native American. He's of what's called the Sioux tribe of Montana. He's also a basketball coach. Really lovely, warm, like one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. But sadly, in his community, they're battling epidemic levels of obesity, and as a result, diabetes. And for him, this was very personal. In 2001, his mother passed away from complications of type 2 diabetes. Sam also works for Nike. So he works for one of the largest sporting and athletic companies in the world, and he thought, wow, like there's this massive problem in my community, but I'm working this place and I think I could do something. And as he said to me, he's like, I didn't have this grand plan. I just had this feeling that I could help, right? I wanted to bring my values to work. I had this problem with these people that I care about. What could I do to help? So he just started out with something very simple. He worked with the tribal elders to organize fun runs, to organize events, and he got them free Nike products, so free shoes and other things to incentivize people to take part. And he would tell his story. I mean, this is the other thing about intrapreneurs, is they love telling their story. And he would just talk to anybody who would listen about the good work that they were doing. And he started talking to some footwear designers. They said, well, hey, we want to help as well. So they ended up designing a shoe, a special shoe for the Native American community. And what was interesting about this shoe is that it embodied these principles of 7 generations, which is the idea that we think when we create things about the 7 generations behind us and 7 generations ahead of us. This is now developed into an entire product line for Nike called N7, the proceeds of which go into supporting physical activity programming for Aboriginal and Native American youth. And Sam, I forgot to mention, he's working in a warehouse, right? He didn't have a fancy MBA. He didn't have a fancy degree. He just had a heart, and he felt he could do something. And now he's the general manager of this entire division. So for me, this is just an incredibly powerful example how people are finding meaning at work. That's translating into mission. That's translating into business value. You can put a business case around this. It really is what's showing up as human beings in their place. So the third is, well, it's disruption, right? It's the Uber effect. It really is the fact that competition is coming from anywhere, right? We have technology companies that are making cars. We have this explosion of peer-to-peer platforms. Who knows, where your competition is going to come from next? And also the research showing, which many of you have probably heard about, the average company lifespan shrinking from 75 years to 15 years, right? We are in an era of disruption. And if you could go to the next slide, what it shows is this life cycle, right? And I'm sure many of you use these diagrams, but to talk about the life cycle of the corporation across the bottom. And that's business as usual, right? And so there's a certain skill set required to scale and to maintain and to operationalize your existing business model. But you're in an era of disruption, right? You're here at the top. And if you don't want to go down the bottom, you need a new skill set. Right? This is the space for intrapreneurs. This is where you need to mobilize your entrepreneurial muscle. And what's interesting is many companies, so you think about Nike, that company started by Phil Knight. He was selling shoes out of the back of his car. So these, many companies had entrepreneurial muscles, but they've lost them along the way. And it's time to find those muscles again, and to bring in people like you here in this room, the intrapreneurs, they can hop that next wave. It's a very different skill set around prototyping, experimenting, collaboration, sensing, systems thinking. Very different from this kind of scaling and business usual skill set. So this is an example of an intrapreneur who's disrupted from within, and kind of an interesting postscript as well for him. So how many of you have heard of the M-Pesa project? So Vodafone's mobile money. So this is Hughes, and he was one of a couple of intrapreneurs at Vodafone. And the idea that Nick and his colleagues had was that they could use their mobile telephony platform to help people who are receiving microfinance to send and receive payments. So this idea that I'm living in Africa, I'm receiving microfinance payments, but I don't have access to traditional bank account. But maybe I have a mobile phone, so I can use that to send and receive money. I could also use that to send money to my cousins, in a city thousands of miles away. So the idea was to provide financial inclusion to millions of people that don't have access to traditional financial services. So Nick had this, like an entrepreneur does, we have a great idea. And he went to his senior leadership team and said, hey, I've got a great idea. And what do you think they did? They give him the money? Yeah, no. What they did is they said, that's not our business, right? So this idea that they're on that first curve. They're like, oh, well, this is the business we're in, right? We sell airtime. We're a mobile phone company. We're a telephone company. This is the business we're in. He's like, no, we're a platform, right? We're a platform enabling financial services. We're a platform enabling healthcare. So he saw that next wave. Fortunately, Nick received a grant from the DFID, which is the International Development Agency in the UK, and he was able to prototype the idea. So instead of coming back to senior leadership with another PowerPoint, he came back with customers. So that's another lesson for intrapreneurs, right? They're great at prototyping and bringing the idea off the page. So I guess the postscript, though, that's quite interesting, and I realize I'm being filmed here, so maybe I shouldn't tell this, but basically, Nick's left Vodafone. So this is a lesson for all you facilitators and senior leaders, is they didn't create a supportive space for him to scale and really develop this. I don't think that the company really bought in that this was the new platform. So he's gone off and set up M-Copa, which is a mobile platform working on providing renewable energy, solar energy to customers in Africa. They're scaling like crazy. And so it is kind of the flip side of this is you lose people if you don't create those enabling conditions. It's not always negative, he's doing great work, but what if he'd stayed, right? What kind of innovation could he have developed for the organization then? So this question that we ask at the League, right? Like, what if we could invest $1 million to get $1 billion of investment in social impact? Right? This is the promise that intrapreneurs are what we would call high leverage points in the ecosystem. They're the people inside companies that can unlock this kind of resource. And an example is just an entrepreneurial team at Citibank. They've just made a commitment to invest literally $1 billion in Citibanamex in Mexico to focus on financial inclusion. Half of Mexico still doesn't have access to traditional banking. But that's the power of the intrapreneur. And these aren't heroes, these are teams. They're working in collaboration, but they're able to unlock this kind of money for social impact. But it's not without its challenges. So we talked a lot about these today, so I won't go into them, but there are a number of challenges facing intrapreneurs along the journey. It's not an easy ride. It's not for the faint of heart. People say, oh, well, you get a paycheck. Well, you also put your job on the line most days, right? It is a challenging journey, which is why the League exists. We set up the League to support people like you. And the next slide basically looks at how we think about intrapreneurship at the systems level, but also if you look at this inside your organization, what do you need to do to create the enabling conditions for intrapreneurs to succeed? So the first is this idea of permission, right? We won't act unless we feel we have the permission and the belief that if I do something, it will make a difference, right? So how can you foster that belief and identity as an intrapreneur in your organization. The second thing, though, then to think about is once people feel they have permission, they've got identity, they need the tools, the resources, the knowledge, the learning to be able to have impact. So that's kind of the next thing to think about. We talk about communities, action learning communities. And then the final question is, how will you sustain it? How will you really embed it into your systems, your processes, your recruitment, your retention, so that it really has an impact over time and isn't just a flash in the pan. So I just have a few examples of how companies are doing that. I know many came up today in our conversations, but I just wanted to quickly share with you some examples I've taken away, or I guess been inspired by. And I think the first thing to think about is this idea about space to discover. We're so focused in our silos, we're so focused on our day jobs. Intrapreneurs need that inspiration, they need that spark. The journey starts with that kind of aha moment, or that kind of period of time where you're immersing yourself in a question. What's the problem you're inspired to solve? And so we've seen a number of companies set up very effective volunteering programs or immersion programs where they expose intrapreneurs to these systems challenges, and then intrapreneurs come back and start connecting them to their day jobs. So these are just two examples. On the left, this is an employee of GSK, so a large global pharmaceutical company. She was part of a Pulse program where they send employees for several months. It's quite a commitment, but they take a cohort of about 100 employees and they place them in NGOs for several months. And then they come back to the company inspired to do something differently. So one of the winners of the League Awards 3 years ago was a GSK employee. He had gone to Africa and he'd seen how there were very little diagnostic tools for pregnant women. And these women living in remote villages that didn't have access to traditional health care. And so he came back to GSK, asked the question, how can we develop low-cost diagnostics for these pregnant women? So that was his inspiration. This is a picture of the Ganges River. And I was really inspired by a project I heard some colleagues were running called Leaders Quest. And they basically took a team of corporate executives on a tour of the Ganges, which is, I think, the fifth largest river in the world, and it's the third most polluted. But upstream, at the source, it's beautiful. So they started upstream at this beautiful, beautiful origin of this river, and then took them slowly down the Ganges to see the environmental degradation that was happening, and to see people swimming in this. And if that doesn't make you think differently about your supply chain, I don't know what will. So these kind of spaces to discover and exploration. So the next thing to think about is it's a tactic that companies are using, are awards and competitions. So we heard a lot about that today. But putting out an explicit call, inviting your employees to give their ideas. They have great ideas. So that's just another example. If you skip to the next slide, thinking about then this idea of learning communities and tools and support. So we've worked with companies to create kind of mini versions of what happened here today, right? Getting together with peers, getting together with mentors, supporting them internally along the journey. I know many of you are working on accelerator programs. It's an incredibly powerful way to support intrapreneurs. And I just wanted to quickly mention that we've developed a toolkit that's available for free on our website. So tools like this exist. I know Ashoka has a wonderful toolkit for co-creation. I'm sure Ticket for Change also has tools. So looking for these kinds of resources and making them available to your intrapreneurs is also a really helpful way to support them. And finally, this idea of processes and incentives, right? So that these aren't one-offs, but how do you really embed entrepreneurship in your recruitment and embed it in your retention, embed it in your rewards. I know we heard some wonderful testimonials from Danone today about how they're doing it. I'll just share one example from Allianz, a 100-year-old bank that's actually thinking about entrepreneurship. And I was really struck by that story, but basically what they've discovered is that their high potential talent aren't delivering. And it's too long a story to go into all the details, but basically they've redefined this term high potential to incorporate entrepreneurial characteristics. So they are literally recruiting entrepreneurs at a 100-year-old bank because they're now looking out the next 100 years. So how are you embedding entrepreneurship into your formal recruitment and retention systems. So just lastly, I'll leave you with the thought of like, what next, right? So kind of looking out and sensing like, where is this going? And I have to say, it's just, again, so incredible to see you all here, because, 5 years ago, this didn't have the energy and buzz that it does today. So this movement is sparking very quickly. And what we're starting to see and sense is intrapreneurs, not just in business, but actually in any large institution, governments and nonprofits. And what's exciting about that is when you're working on systems challenges, you can find your intrapreneur at the city of Paris. You can find your intrapreneur at WWF. This is about team, Bill Drayton talks about team of teams. This is about finding the right partners to collaborate with to make systems change happen. So it's very exciting to see that, and I guess it makes me think of that Margaret Mead quote, which is very overused, but about the power of a small team to make change. And I just wanted to leave you with one final quote that I've been very inspired by thinking about this movement, which is, it always seems impossible until it's done. So I just encourage you to think about that with your next project. It always seems impossible until it's done. So thank you for having me, and I invite you to ask any questions. You just want a drink? Yes.
Thank you very much. I am Olivier. That's the league about intrapreneurship, not social intrapreneurship. From your perspective, what is the speed of traditional business intrapreneurship and social entrepreneurship? Do we have a better speed or a stronger speed with social entrepreneurship? Do you think that purpose bring more energy to intrapreneurs to make the world different?
I'm probably biased, but yes. It's a really interesting question about the difference between just intrapreneurship and social intrapreneurship. And I guess I'd say two things. One is I feel like they're evening out in terms of speed. So intrapreneurship has been around for decades and is an established field, although it's now just kind of coming into its own. I think at the same time that social is. And I don't often use social anymore because I think there's such convergence now around these issues that companies are really taking them much more seriously and looking at them at the core. But I definitely take your point that when you put purpose and meaning, it just makes it's a whole different thing. So I think when you embed this race for talent driver and you look at what motivates people, I mean, young people are coming in wanting to work on these issues. So I think we're seeing a convergence. I think there's a lot to learn across the patch. So we work with a group called the Intrapreneurship Conference, and they invite us to every event to really put in kind of the social and kind of plug in the more traditional entrepreneurship track. Yes.
In your opinion, what's missing for companies to trust in entrepreneurs? Like it may be a French question, because outside of France, it's more maybe people are more aware to this kind of new way to work, but in France, it's a bit different. So what's missing for you?
I think it depends on the organization, so these will be kind of gross generalizations. I think the idea of letting go is difficult for all of us. I don't think it's necessarily unique to France. There's this wonderful work by Frederic Laloux. Do you know this? Future of Organizations. And he talks about different models of organizing. And so our corporate model is very hierarchical. It's a military command and control model. He uses color coding, so he talks about this orange model of organizing. And intrapreneurs represent something different. It represents something much more distributed, much more kind of middle and bottom up, and it means trusting, your employees to do the right thing. And this is the way, this is the trajectory we're on, but it means unlearning, it means letting go, of these very traditional models of organizing. So I think that's probably the biggest maybe barrier to acceptance of this. And one of the reasons we're actually relaunching the Global Award with the League is to tell more of these success stories. So, so companies and senior leadership can be inspired by that and see this something as something to aspire to and not to be afraid of. Yeah, that's a great question. Yes?
How much time does it take from the first small entrepreneur to the company naming this initiative officially? How much time does it take?
It so depends. You know, I mean, Emmanuel de Lutzel will say, you know, it was like a decade before he could really, you know, so much of this is about timing. And I think there was a quote somewhere here about the timing, right? So if you have a great idea and its time has come, you know, you could ratchet up quite quickly. For others, I mean, this is, you know, 10 years of something in the drawer of their bureau. And that was the story of Allianz, actually. So they invited people to take those ideas out of their desk drawer that they'd been sitting on for 10 years and bring them forward. And actually then you can have something move really quickly. And we were talking about today, somebody was sharing, you know, this worry about having to make it perfect, and you know, we're doing this one project and what if it fails? And we said, well, just develop a minimum viable product. You know, so I think that's also something entrepreneurs are bringing, is a different way to kind of evaluate like scale and going to market, right? So what can you do in 6 months? What could you do in 6 weeks? Like, give yourself these constraints. I mean, it's really, really good practice to say, like, what could I go to market with? What can I test quickly? I mean, this is what entrepreneurs do. You know, entrepreneurs don't have the luxury of sitting around noodling and thinking about it because they're not getting a paycheck. You know, so thinking as an entrepreneur, like, how can I go to market quickly? How can I test this idea? So I'd say, you know, you can have things going, especially with digital, right? You know, there's not a lot of infrastructure investment costs. You can have stuff in market, you know, in weeks that you're testing. The adoption is going to depend on the organization, and really, does this hit the sweet spots? Do you have a senior sponsor? That's incredibly important. If you don't have a sponsor for your project, Lionel should be up here with me nodding, but that's what we've found. And I know David Grayson has written a lot about this in a book, talking about the godparent or the odd parent, the guardian angel that gives you space. Those people are so important. They protect you from another colleague of ours who set up Accenture Development Partnerships, which Lionel is a part of. He talks about the corporate immune system, right? And how entrepreneurs are this new like DNA, you know, and the immune system wants to spit you out. That's the reaction. And so you're having to kind of work against that natural reaction of the organism, which is why it's sometimes a bit painful. And it's why we're here for you. You're not alone. So.
Dernière question.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your story? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah.
What's your experience?
Yeah. We can do the long story over drinks. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, when I think about my work, what I've always been attracted to are opportunities to help people unlock what I would call human agency. Does that translate into French? Agence? Yeah, so agence humaine. So entrepreneurs have this incredible spirit, right? You're unlocking your own potential. And I've always been very attracted by that, by how people find that for themselves. They find their passion, they find their purpose, they find their reason for being. And so I started working with entrepreneurs, with Ashoka and the Skoll Foundation, and looking at how we could support them and scale up their work. And through some research I was doing with Ashoka and with the Skoll Foundation, I was meeting these social entrepreneurs in companies, these people who were coming to work what we call fully actualized, right? I am living my purpose in my day job. And personally, I just find that so inspiring, you know? Like, I want that. Don't you want that? Like, who doesn't want that? That's the 13%, right? Like or maybe it's the 2%, right? But it's this idea that we can be so much more. We spend so much time at work. Wouldn't it be great if it had that much meaning and we were having impact? So I guess it's just a very high level kind of way of describing my journey to this is just meeting people. They're so infectious when they found this purpose. I thought, how can I help unlock that for other people and support them in doing that? So thank you, and more over champagne.